Welcome one and all to another Technobabble session, which have been much requested, so I'll be taking a return to these more regularly now, and this time we're taking a look at new consoles that are launching this year and into 2017, and just what we might be looking at. Now, times have certainly changed, with digital games now being a much larger portion of game sales, add-ons being not only wanted but successful. Well, some anyway. But it also seems that the shift to a more stable and coherent hardware and operating system platform has also brought along wide changes. With rumours of upgrades, plugins, 4K viewing, we could just be seeing one of the shortest as yet and last single, see static, generations. First, let's look at the facts for both current machines and my own yet to launch with a Nintendo NX. Yeah, not really. To say the Wii U was a failure would be an understatement in the extreme, largely due to its lack of any real killer own brand software, but even more so, the absence of third-party houses avoiding it like the weak kid at team selection. Now, this is an issue they desperately need to address, as they are the biggest portion of any platform's success or failure. Sadly, it appears this may not have fully sunk in, with many developers seemingly not aware of the machine specs. Now, the initial thought was that it will have the market to itself as the only new boy on the block in 2016 when revealed at E3, but this may not be the case, and added to the fact it could only be as powerful as the PS4 currently is at best, again seems that Nintendo still missed the point by a mile. Now, I hope and pray that when it does release, it has games that impress and entices both the market and third party. With all that we know at this stage, the path will not be clear for the Big N, and it could have just become even more rocky. The thought that it will also be an AMD powered APU is what is expected, but I would not be shocked to my core to see it built around an ARM processor instead, and a Power VR GPU solution, which would be both exciting to see and different enough for Nintendo to take. Backwards compatibility could easily be handled within emulation. We shall see what happens. Now, we've had Phil Spencer himself talk about updates, evolution of the console, and all this stems from the Windows 10 ecosystem it is all built around. Now, UWP and UWA is getting a lot of flack at present, and even though some of the criticism is ill-placed and without fact, the concerns are real across the board. But let's be honest here for a second, Microsoft are far more business orientated than they are video games, and they're not going to destroy their operating system, server infrastructure and development platforms. That's just not how these things work. Games are not what Microsoft are overall about. But this is not for this article. Suffice to say, for now, this is clearly a fast plan from Microsoft, and this will all improve greatly over the next 12 months as they make the Windows Store and universal apps more and more appealing. Now, this is all due to the hardware and operating system configuration, allowing this kind of platform agnostic method to work like crossplay of near identical code, backwards compatibility, and obviously newer hardware. The first thing I am pretty confident we will not see is a plug-in or upgrade to the Xbox One at this stage. The entire machine, structure and memory subsystem is not suited for some ad hoc augment, but the next machine may well be an option, but we could also see much simpler methods being used. And this is exactly what I think will happen. What is pretty much a given is both Microsoft and Sony will still partner with AMD for whatever they have planned, but it may not be an APU by default. The thing to remember is these consoles launched in 2013 from hardware specs sealed and planned 12 months or so prior. We have moved on 4 years since then, and computation has changed direction in the last 10 years. No longer is the hunt on within Moore's law for more power, but instead less power use, but the same or smaller increments. This means less heat and size. Even though hardware specs remain static throughout a generation, the actual hardware does not and never has. But the norm of saving costs, reducing power and efficiency to make a profit on the hardware was ditched at this generation's start. Instead, for the first time, both companies sold the machines at a profit. Previously, the aim was to reduce manufacturing costs by mid-cycle. Each machine was in the black rather than the red. Consistency was maintained through hardware and software to keep each machine close enough in spec to not matter for both users and developers alike. The original Xbox 360, for example, was a standard CPU and discrete GPU across the motherboard. After updates, this was reduced into a single APU with a much smaller footprint, thermal pattern and cost. Without this reduction in the requirement, this could have easily been a more powerful machine. The same thing happened across the PS3, losing the PS2 hardware very early on, altering and removing parts along with halving the cell from a 90nm to 45nm, in addition to the Nvidia RSX reducing cost, heat and size as its intended target. By now this is all out of the window. 4 years in, both machines could be made smaller along with running with less heat and cost as per previous cycles. But equally, they could also decide to use current level hardware that is of the same TDP or slightly higher in a new chassis as a premium product at a more suitable premium price, and this is my thoughts entirely, but the plan may be coming from two separate directions. They're just headed in the same place for each. As I mentioned last year, we have now seen Microsoft very focused on converging into a single unified platform with PC, phone and console all running under the Windows 10 umbrella, agnostic of chipset or badge. With AMD the given partner in all of this for the internals, I can easily see Microsoft franchise with independent hardware manufacturers like MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, etc. and sell Xbox 2 or Xbox Pro or whatever they call it as a spectrum of products. Now this may not happen yet with them releasing the first new machine themselves, which will be fully compatible with both Oculus Rift and Vive. As it stands, the Xbox One cannot run a VR solution like the PC and PS4 have. And with this year being the year of VR, I expect more information at E3. And I feel this is the driving force for them, not to miss out on the next big ticket. And it is all possible due to the decisions made at the start. With the API and hypervisor taking care of the hardware layer, it can leave developers free to use the allocation they have at their disposal. This means that whatever is coming will be fully backwards compatible with the entire current and forthcoming catalogue, and this will indeed include backwards compatible Xbox 360 titles that I feel are nailed on to appear in the Windows Store shortly, and we could very well see frame rate and resolution elements when they do, dependent on your hardware of course. Now all current games could very easily receive updates to improve hardware profiles and may even include more visual menu options going forward with newer titles. Yes, just like the PC release, as they will be one and the same. But this will most likely only be limited with titles, with all future ones being supported from launch. So, the plan is clear, but how will this all work is maybe not so, and I must stress I have no insider information or close ties with Microsoft at this level, and anyone with this knowledge wouldn't be able to publicly share it anyway, so anything you do hear should be taken with a pinch of salt. These are purely my thoughts based on my knowledge of both hardware, software and corporate business. Now this is something many forget. These are all businesses after all. The new machines will almost certainly sport the Polaris GPU from AMD, set to launch this year in two formats, along with its brand new and much more powerful Zen CPU, designed by the returned mind of Jim Keller. Known for his last game changer, the Athlon 64, so the legacy is, and expectations are strong. The early information states a 40% increase in IPC, putting the new chip in the ballpark of Intel and its Skylake architecture. Its multi-core technology is unquestioned, and paired with such drastic configuration changes, aided by the now multi-core rendering improvements we have seen for these consoles and DX12 Vulkan, it could be one hell of a machine, which I am sure will come with a price to match, around the £400 to £500, not out of the question. Now with Zen handling multiple threads simultaneously, SMT and greatly improved memory structures, meaning cache and bandwidth improvements all housed on a 3D FinFET transistor with most likely HBM memory, we are looking around 3 to 4 times GPU improvements and a much bigger leap in CPU. Now bearing in mind a lot of the rumours coming from Polaris states that this is very impressive technology and very useful for VR, and this again points to the reason why both companies are looking heavily at this. The thing to remember here is the options available change dependent on intended price and launch aims. HBM2 is already in mass production, offering up twice the bandwidth of HBM seen in its creator's first card, the Fury X. Well, co-creator anyway. But with these limited to 4GB, this can be doubled to 8GB with the new technology. Now GDDR5X is not yet in mass production and as such could be a factor if an early launch is needed. The new technology offers up great improvements over both bandwidth and power use, and just like HBM, but in both regards it's not at the same level. Peak theoretical throughput of HBM is 512 gigabits per second, with its successor achieving twice that, which in reality is in excess of what both companies would ever need, but the huge space, power and heat reductions are not, with 8GB of HBM2 being a realistic and plentiful level, but possibly just a little bit too far. But GDDR5X is not without its own benefits. It will be in mass production within months and could still ship on launch products in 2016, bringing many gains that include power, heat and bandwidth. With just 128-bit wide at 224GB, power use would only be around 10 watt. Now a higher bandwidth than both consoles currently have, but the 4GB limit would rule this out. So the 256-bit wide solution would still only double this to around 20 watts, which is around 5 watts more than HBM, but sporting a huge 448GB per second. At the 8GB limit would mean that space wasted on the current chip for the SRAM could now be used to increase the ALU quota, as this scratch pad would no longer be needed. The best part of this is that the configuration of the memory and controllers is close to GDDR5, meaning manufacturing is much less of an issue, more so for Sony. This, along with its potential higher size levels for expansion, cost saving, makes this a real contender for both parties. It will all come down to timeframes and cost targets as always, but both solutions offer up a viable and tangible gains, as does simply sticking with GDDR5, or in this case for the Xbox One, moving to GDDR5. Of note to add here is the fact that AMD are aware of this, and Polaris is already designed to work with both HBM and GDDR5 solutions, so this has already been a factor. But these will be a more premium product designed to play all your current games faster and more visually impressive than before. The hardware deficit to Sony has hurt Microsoft, and this is not a place it likes to be in. With a new far more high-end machine, it can turn the tables very quickly on that, and it is a company that can easily afford it. Remember how fast it dropped the Xbox for the 360, and history states how successful that was. The change here is the Xbox One will continue to play all future titles and be the base spec of games, with simple cutbacks made on resolution, frame rates and effects, all handled within the operating system and API layers. All notched up to the maximum on this new machine that could be pushing a 4 teraflop GPU with faster memory and a much better CPU. We could have a machine that would be more in line with high-end i7s and Fury X, but with the benefit of the Xbox catalogue and two choice VR solutions in the mix, all of a sudden the machine would become very appealing to console and PC gamers alike. Even a VR package would not be impossible, as Microsoft has already linked with Oculus, as we saw last year. Now I know many think this is madness, but not only is this more than possible, on paper it looks very probable indeed. The only issue is that an APU on the new 14nm FinFET technology may be a stretch too far if the machines need to launch in Q4 of 2016. So it may be a bigger box, but as the Fury Nano has shown, the memory changes to HBM and the new manufacturing process means it could easily come in with the ballpark of a small form factor unit that fits the console and living room space easily, with the added benefits of better games, 100% compatibility and VR options to boot. Bear in mind the current APUs in both consoles run at 28nm, so this is a big leap in technology we're looking at in those 4 years that have passed. Now E3 could be a big splash on all current games, with easily a launch on both machines and PC to maximise ROI. I also think it will mark a shift in internal studios for Microsoft, sadly witnessed by Lionhead and other closures. I think it will keep a small pool of studios but rely heavily on third party for software, and as I've stated above, later on for the hardware, to allow multiple avenues into its own Windows ecosystem without the costly hardware process, now all managed within its software abstraction layers, with these savings being used for the new plan. The future is bright. The future is virtual. To reiterate, the aim from Microsoft here is to build its Xbox Windows 10 brand, and returning to a loss leader format would not be a plan I think either side will take. But the sales of higher end hardware and vocal complaints have shown that the market can not only accept split level higher brand products, it actually is crying out for it. With addition to the family, it will achieve a leap in performance, with 4K being heavily advertised, along with it able to run all the high-end VR software with a simple plug and play solution. They can commit to 18 month supply quota, which is a great deal for AMD, and due to the bulk purchase, a £500 level for this kind of machine could be the sweet spot. VR obviously in addition to this. Which brings us to Sony and its PS4, which finds itself in an entirely different situation, but with an equally challenging dilemma. As it stands, Microsoft has much more to gain from this shift. From some perspectives, it really only strengthens them. But for Sony, the clear winner this generation in terms of sales, focus and goodwill, with a brand new and already much in demand VR solution incoming, why on earth would they want to ruin all of that, fragment the market and possibly create bad feeling? It's a very good question. The answer is the same as before: competition. this time from both Microsoft plans and the expanding PC gaming market. Sony cannot yet have the free entry into this customer base from a ready-made operating system. Instead, it has the gaming-centric platform crown with its console, but they know all too well that the honeymoon ends at some point. And sadly, as we have just seen with the sad news of Drive Club developer Evolution Studios' closure, it is still a cost-sensitive business. So again, these are just my thoughts on what is planned and what I feel are the reasons. First thing is, nothing will be mentioned or happen in 2016. With a new hardware launch already planned this year with PSVR, it would only muddy the water. That will comfortably expand while being fully compatible with whatever they have in the pipeline for the future. But the PC market is never static, and even though the hardware has delivered some truly eye-watering games thus far and yet to come, the gap is only growing as each year passes by. But the Microsoft plans add to this, and Sony will not want to be that far behind the curve of the other players, so really, it has no other option or choice but to react and prepare. And this is what the PS4K or PS5 is all about. And just like Microsoft, the leap to AMD and x86-64 is done. So having a longer lifespan that allows shared development to continue with the extra benefits of higher frame rates, effects and resolution, but more importantly, to keep in line or ahead of the competition. It will also prolong and improve its VR push and keep the games in line with the high-end PC market, which it simply cannot ignore. Again, this means that AMD will likely be the candidate along with its new Zen CPU and Polaris system. Having to wait out the big winter sales period while possibly its competition leaping first may be a tough call, but one I think will happen. Holding back a year means it will launch later, but this means a slightly more powerful system and or a cheaper price. Again, allowing both consoles to coexist for a longer period, as developers simply use the higher specs for PC-like improvements. And by around 2018, both specs to be the new base for developers, and the older machines fall away as before, and the end of the 5-year cycle. The same base specs mean it will be a total 6, maybe 8 teraflop machine, and will hit the 4K 30 target for modern indie games, shipping over the next few years. Bearing in mind, even high-end PC games are not going to guarantee that target. The construction of the PS4 hardware, hypervisor and API means, just like Microsoft, it can easily handle this shift as it blurs the lines of generation, allowing the user to pick a machine that suits the tech-heavy or cheaper gaming entry point. Again, like Microsoft, this will be a more premium product, but still cheaper than a competing standalone PC solution. And this is the market it not only has to compete against, but tempt over to the blue side. Again, all current titles could be updated with boosts if required, and both machines would enable higher quality assets, as pretty much all development pipelines now are built around minimum 4K workflows. These are then realised much closer to the native tools rather than reduced, as we see in current titles and future ones that ship on the older machines and the PC spec range. The fact is that at the end of the day, both companies have a target to hit and a price level to mark at. PC is not sitting still. Microsoft is in a situation where it has to react or move back to the PC and just give that a try. Sony cannot sit on its hands. As successful as their current platform is, it can't wait and see what happens. And with UHD TVs becoming more standard and cheaper to buy, by marketing a console that supports 4K, it doesn't mean that every game has to run at that resolution. A much better upscaler to aim at that target level would also mean that both machines would hit the kind of levels that are expected of this generation and feel more of a leap, even if in actual throughput they're not really that big a leap over their current machines now. VR and 4K is a big target and talking point at present, and with the Polaris being very suited to that, I'm sure is a very big reason why we're seeing these kind of changes at all. So E3 could be an exciting time for new plans and announcements to come, and I am sure the picture will certainly clear more as we move throughout the year. But you can be sure I will keep you up to date and informed on it all, as I always do. As always, if you enjoyed this or any of my other content, then please support me by hitting the subscribe button, the like button. If you didn't like it, hit the down and tell me what you did or didn't like. I expect this to be a big talking point and something that many people are interested in on both sides of the fence. So whether or not you have thoughts, what's your opinion, what do you think of what I've said? Do you think this is good or bad for the generation and the platforms as a whole? Leave all your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. You guys and girls take care, and I'll see you very soon on the next one.